I noticed a lot of you are waiting to the last minute apparently. Really was hoping you'd be able to work ahead with that extra month. At any rate, I'm looking at practice problems from chapter 4. I'll try to get you through as many as I can without giving it away. So here we have days sales outstanding of 18 days. Annual sales are given there, and they're asking for accounts receivable. So here's the equation I have for days sales outstanding. Is receivables over average daily sales, and rearranging that just to solve for receivables, you'd have days sales outstanding times sales over 365. So that'd be 18, right? Times 8,395,000 divided by 365. When I put that in my calculator, I am getting 414,000. So let's go ahead and see if that's correct. Yeah, it is. And then number 2, debt to capital ratio. Here, the market to book value is 1, so the book value is equal to the market value. The stock price is given as $14 per share, so therefore the book value must also be $14 per share. And there's 4.5 million shares outstanding. Total capital, or total assets, is 110 million. What is the debt to capital ratio? Well, that should be the same as the debt ratio, just debt over, going down here. So here for this, requires a couple more equations than the last one. First, we need to recognize that that debt plus equity equals assets. So therefore, debt must be assets minus equity. The equity, book values, and market values are the same, so equity is 4.5 million shares times $14 million. And the equity, that'd be this right here, 4.5 million shares times $14 per share. That's total equity value. Then we divide that by 110 million. That would give us equity per share. I'm sorry, not earnings per share. That gives us basically the market price of equity. We don't need this. I'm sorry, that was a mistake. Excuse me. All right. So total equity is just market value of the per share, $14, times the number of shares outstanding. And since book value and market value are the same, this is the total equity that should be on the balance sheet. So then total debt, according to this equation, total debt is just asset, or total capitalization, 110 million, minus the equity that we just calculated. And then once you have solved for that total debt, that is this, you simply divide by total assets to get the debt ratio, or debt. Yeah. So when I do that, I'm getting 42.73. 42.73. You need to see that again. Of course, you can back up the tape, but there's more than one way of getting this. By the way, you could have solved for the equity ratio, that is equity over assets. You could have done it the way I'd started to, divided by 110 million, and then that would be like an equity ratio, and then 1 minus that equity over assets ratio would be the debt ratio. So that would have also worked. I believe you'd get the same number. Again, I got 42.73. I haven't checked these numbers yet, so I'm hoping it's right. Please. Thank you. It's right. So far, so good. And some of these actually have problem work-throughs, but all of them, of course, hopefully you know by now. It takes you to a relevant page there in the textbook. DuPont analysis. That's the return on equity equals return on assets times equity multiplier stuff. Here we have return on assets is 8%, 4% profit margin, and return on equity is 20%. They ask for the total asset turnover. For this one, you just need to know that return on assets is equal to the profit margin times total asset turnover, which makes sense if you think about it. Net income, net profit margin is net income over sales, and total asset turnover is defined as sales over total assets. And the sales cancel out. One is on top and one's on the bottom, and you're left with net income over total assets, which is, of course, the definition of return on assets. Anyway, rearranging this equation to get total asset turnover by itself on the left-hand side, we have this, return on assets over profit margin. And that would be plugging in the numbers, 8% over 4%, which is just 2. So that answer there should be 2. And going back, now it's asking for the equity multiplier. Well, that's that would be the DuPont equation, which says that return on equity is equal to return on assets times an equity multiplier, where the equity multiplier is, well, technically it's defined as 1 divided by 1 minus the debt ratio, but we don't need that information yet. So rearranging this equation, the DuPont equation, to solve for equity multiplier, we get the multiplier equal to return on equity divided by return on assets. So that would be just simply 20% over 8%, which is 20 over 8 is 2.5. So that should be 2.5. Again, hoping it's right. Got my fingers crossed. Yes. Success. Now let's go to the next one, number 4. Edelman Engines has $6 billion of assets. Balance sheet shows $1.2 billion of current well, they give us these current liabilities, long-term debt. They're separating those out. And $0.9 billion or $900,000 of common equity, 400 million shares of common stock outstanding. The stock price is $30. The question is, what is market to book ratio? So for this one, market to book is just simply the market price to book value of the shares. So it turns out we don't need all this stuff up here, I don't think. But again, I haven't checked it yet. So the number of shares is 400 million, so we take 400 million as the number of shares, or number of signed shares on my equation here. And then we have times the price of 400 million times the price of $30 per share. And then we divide, and that would be the total market value of all of the shares, all the equity that's outstanding. And then we divide by the book value of equity, which is given 0.9. So that would be, again, 400 million times 30, all divided by 900,000. 400 million times 30 divided by 900,000. And when I do that, I get, I hope this is right, 13.33 to 2 decimal places. So yes, it is correct. I was worried for a second. PE ratio. Company has earnings per share of $1.5, book value per share of $16.2, and the market to book value ratio is 2.8. What's the PE ratio? What is the PE ratio? So this is number 5 in Europe's. PE ratio is defined as the market price of a share divided by their earnings per share. The market price of a share, the market price is just book value times the market to book ratio. And here we're trying to, so if we knew what what we do. So we need the book value per share of 16.2 times the market to book ratio of 2.8. So 16.2 times 2.8 would be the market price of the share. You just take that and divide by earnings per share of 1.5. And when I do that, I get 36.24. Yeah, that's incorrect. So what did I do wrong? 2.8. Let me give up. So that's going to be. I think what's happening here is I couldn't tell whether that was a 6 or a 0. So I've already wasted one of my attempts, so now I've got to try. I think that's 30. It's my eyes. I hope 30.24. Let's try it. Because that's the right calculation. Okay. I've got 4 more remaining after this if I get it wrong again. So let's try 30 instead of 36. And yes, that is correct. Good. Okay, DuPont and return on equity. So here we have the profit margin is given, the equity multiplier is given, the sales are given, and total assets are given. What's the return on equity? So we know that return on equity is equal to return on assets times an equity multiplier. Since return on assets is profit margin times total asset turnover, we have this version of the same equation here. And we're given that information, it looks like. We can just plug them right in. So 5.5% times sales are 70 million and assets are 35, so 70 over 35 is 2, so total asset turnover would be 2.0. And the equity multiplier is 2.7. So we have 5.5 times 2 times 2.7, and that gives us 29.7 is what I'm getting for that. Let's check that one. Yes. Income, we're given total sales is 16 million, return on equity 12%, total asset turnover is 2.5, common equity is 80% of total assets that's given. And we want net income. So we know that total asset turnover is sales over assets. If we rearrange that equation, we get total assets as sales over total asset turnover. So we'll do that to get total assets. We need that number because in calculating net income, we're going to get net income from the return on equity equation. The return on equity is given here is 12%, and we know that return on income is defined as net income over equity. Rearranging that equation, we get net income is return on equity times total equity. So if we knew what total equity was, we could find this net income. So, and we know that equity is 0.8 times assets. So first we solve for assets using the total asset turnover, and then use what's given to us, that is where it says on the balance sheet equity is 80% of assets, right? So given net income and equity, we can go ahead and return that. Given net income is return on equity times equity, and we have return on equity and equity now. We calculate as return on equity is 12% times 0.8 times the total assets that we just solved for right up here. And when I do that, I get 614,400. 614,400. Alright, so let's go to the next one. Basic earning power, return on equity, and return on investment capital. Basic return on assets, and in this case, I think Broward reports this. We have net income, we have return on assets, we have interest, we have accounts payable. The tax rate is given as 30%. They just finance with debt and equity, no preferred stock. 40% debt, 60% equity financing. So we first want the basic earning power. And we know that before we get to that, we know that because basic earning power we know is defined as operating income over assets. So we need EBIT over assets. A is for assets. So first we need EBIT. And so I'm using the income statement equation. Net income equals EBIT minus interest times 1 minus the tax rate. EBIT, operating income, minus the interest paid on debt, is of course taxable income. We multiply by 1 minus the tax rate to get at net income. Rearranging this to set EBIT by itself on the left-hand side and everything else on the right, we would get EBIT equals net income divided by 1 minus the tax rate, and then plus interest. We simply need to add it back. Okay, so so there's EBIT. We know we're going to need to get basic earning power. We also need assets though, but we're going to go ahead and use this 11% return on assets along with the net income, the $495,000. And we know that return on assets is defined as net income over assets. So rearrange that equation. We have total assets equals net income divided by return on assets. Now we can go ahead and calculate this basic earning power. And let me do that. I'm getting 20.11. Next, it asks for return on equity. Return on equity is defined as net income over equity, and we're told that total equity is 60% of financing. Here it is 60% of total capital is equity, or 60% of assets are equity, since everything is financed with debt and equity, stocks and bonds. So we can just go ahead and use 0.6 times assets for equity, and then use the net income that we already solved for. So net income over 0.6 times assets gives us 18.33. And then return on the investment capital would be net income over assets, which is actually an easier calculation. I'm getting 11%. Okay, well, I'm just going to move on. Come back to it later. All right, next we're given the following information. Stock equity on the balance sheet is 2.5 billion. PE ratio is 18.5. Shares outstanding is 80 million shares outstanding. Market to book ratio is 2.8. Calculate the price of the company's stock. Now for this, we know we're given the market to book value ratio, and we also are given the book value of equity. So if we multiply the market to book ratio times book value of equity, we should get market value of equity, right? So that would be market to book ratio is 2.8. Multiply that by the book value of equity, which is what's reported on the balance sheet, 2.5 billion. All right, to get market value of equity, and then we divide by the number of shares. So we're dividing by 80 million shares outstanding, it says, and that should give us a stock price. The market value of equity divided by number of shares outstanding is the stock price per share, or market value per share. When I do that, I'm getting 87.5. All right, and running out of time here. This is not timed. I'm just needing. Never mind. Okay, here it's number 11. Assume we're given total asset turnover, return assets, return equity. So it looks like another DuPont type problem. We have to calculate the profit margin. We know that return on assets is equal to profit margin times total asset turnover. So we should be able to rearrange that to give the profit margin equals return on assets over total asset turnover. Return on assets is 3%, total asset turnover is 2, so 3 over 2 is 1.5. And then in the second part of the question, the debt to capital ratio, assuming the firm only uses debt and equity, no preferred stock. So total assets is total invested capital. All right, which they want us to find. Well, for this we could also use the DuPont equation. I think there's actually, well, I'm using the DuPont equation, which is here. Return on equity is return on assets times equity multiplier. Rearranging that, we get the multiplier as return on equity over return on assets. And then to solve for the debt ratio, you just have to recognize that debt, that the equity multiplier is defined as 1 over 1 minus the debt ratio. Solve that for the debt ratio, and you end up with 1 minus 1 over the equity multiplier. So that's 12 over 3 is 4. 1 over 4 is a quarter, 0.25. 1 minus 0.25 is 0.75, so that's 75%. Okay, that's all I have time for right now, but hopefully this recording works, and hopefully it's helpful for you. I'll add some more later. Bye. Assuming this is right. Yeah, that's right. Okay. I'll work more. I'll put something up. Maybe later this weekend. Actually, yeah, I may do this in the future. I may not. I wouldn't count on it. But I will when I do post recordings where I help with homeworks. I'll make sure that that it's available to everybody in the class, and I will send an announcement that the recording exists by email. So thank you for your patience.